It is February 1959 in the northern Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. A search party has been looking for 9 missing hikers for weeks. They find the camp on a remote mountain slope. The tent is still standing, partially collapsed under snow, but intact. Inside, they find the hikers' belongings: food, equipment, diaries, cameras with film still in them. But no people. The searchers follow a trail of footprints leading away from the tent, down the slope toward the tree line. The footprints are calm and evenly spaced, not the frantic, stumbling tracks of people running in panic, but the measured steps of people walking. In the snow, at night, in temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius. In their socks. Some of them are barefoot. The tent, they discover, has been cut open from the inside. Not unzipped. Cut, slashed with a knife from within, as though whoever was inside needed to get out faster than any zipper could allow. Over the following weeks, the bodies are found one by one. Some near the tree line, where a fire had been lit. Some further away, scattered across the slope. The last 4 are discovered months later, buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine. And this is where the case stops making sense. 3 of the 9 hikers have catastrophic internal injuries, crushed chests, fractured skulls, that a Soviet forensic examiner will compare to the force of a car crash. But there are no external wounds. No bruising on the skin consistent with a beating. No sign of another person. One of the women is missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips. Some of the clothing, when tested, is found to be radioactive. The Soviet government classifies the investigation. The area is closed to hikers for 3 years. The official conclusion, when it finally comes, offers 9 words that explain nothing. Death caused by an unknown compelling force. The 9 hikers of the Dyatlov Pass have been dead for 65 years, and we still do not fully know what killed them. This is the full story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. Before we go to the mountain, we need to know who these 9 people were. Because the Dyatlov Pass incident is not just a mystery. It is the story of 9 specific, real, fully alive human beings, and understanding who they were makes what happened to them matter in a way that no amount of forensic detail alone can achieve. The group was organized through the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, now Ekaterinburg, in the Soviet Union. They were students and recent graduates, mostly in their early 20s, and they were experienced outdoor enthusiasts at a time when hiking and ski touring in the Soviet Union was a serious, organized, and popular activity. Igor Dyatlov was the group's leader, 23 years old, an engineering student known for his calm competence and his love of the outdoors. He had organized and led multiple expeditions before this one. He was methodical, careful, and well-respected by his peers. The pass where they died now bears his name. Zinaida Kolmogorova was 22, a student and experienced hiker, one of the 2 women in the group. She was known for her energy and her warmth, the kind of person who raised the mood of any expedition. Ludmila Dubinina was 21, the other woman in the group. She was studying economics and was the youngest member of the 9. She would become, in the aftermath of the investigation, the subject of the most disturbing findings. Rustam Slobodin was 23, an engineering graduate who was known as a strong and capable outdoorsman. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonischenko were both 21 and 24 respectively, friends and fellow students, experienced hikers. Alexander Zolotaryov was the oldest member of the group at 37, a hiking instructor and World War II veteran who had joined the expedition somewhat late. His presence among a group of students and certain details about his background that emerged only decades later have made him a subject of particular speculation. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol was 23, a civil engineering student. Alexander Kolevatov was 24, a physics student. 9 people, 8 men, 2 women, all experienced, all properly equipped for a winter expedition in the Urals, all aware that the route they were taking was challenging but within their capabilities. They departed Sverdlovsk by train on January 23, 1959. Their destination was Otorten, a mountain in the northern Urals whose name, in the local Monsey language, means roughly "don't go there." The group knew the name and found it funny. They joked about it in their diaries. They were in high spirits. The diaries they kept during the journey are one of the most extraordinary aspects of this case, because they survived. The cameras survived. The photographs survived. We have, in remarkable detail, the record of the last days of 9 people who had no idea what was coming. The diaries describe the train journey, the early hiking, the camaraderie of the group. They describe the food they ate, the songs they sang. A group newspaper they wrote called the Evening Otorten, full of in-jokes and playful observations. The photographs show young faces, laughing, making faces at the camera, posing in the snow with the easy physicality of people who are very comfortable in their bodies and very comfortable with each other. These are not abstractions. These are people. On February 1st, 1959, the group began ascending the slope of Kholat Syakhl, a peak whose name, in Monsey, means dead mountain. They intended to camp on the slope overnight and continue toward Otorten the following morning. That night, something happened. The group was expected to return to Sverdlovsk and send a telegram by February 12th. When no telegram arrived, their families and the institute were not immediately alarmed. Delays were common in winter expeditions, and a few days' lag was not unusual. But by February 20th, concern had grown enough that a search party was organized. Students and staff from the institute set out for the northern Urals. Soviet military search and rescue units were also deployed. On February 26, 1959, the search party found the camp. The tent was on the slope of Kholat Syakhl, partially collapsed under accumulated snow, at an elevation of approximately 1,100 meters. It had been pitched on the open slope rather than in the shelter of the treeline below, a decision that was slightly unusual but not inexplicable for an experienced group wanting an early start the following morning. What the searchers found inside and around the tent established the essential strangeness of the case. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not in one place, in multiple places. The cuts were made with a knife, from within, suggesting that whoever made them needed to exit through the fabric rather than through the entrance. This is something you do when you cannot reach the entrance, when you are buried, or when something is blocking it, or when the urgency of getting out is so extreme that the extra seconds required to unzip feel unacceptable. Inside the tent, the group's belongings were undisturbed. Food was present. Equipment was present. Shoes and boots were present, almost all of them. The hikers had left without their footwear, in temperatures of -30 degrees Celsius. The footprints leading away from the tent told a specific story. There were 8 or 9 sets of tracks, some in socks, some in single boots, some apparently barefoot, leading down the slope toward the treeline approximately 1.5 kilometers below. The tracks were evenly spaced and parallel. The people who made them were walking, not running. They were together, or at least moving in the same direction, in an organized way. This is one of the most puzzling details in the entire case. Whatever had caused them to slash their way out of the tent in the middle of the night and flee into the freezing darkness without their boots, it had not caused them to run in blind panic. They walked, together, calmly, down the slope. At the treeline, searchers found the remains of a small fire. Beside it were the bodies of Krivonischenko and Doroshenko, the first to be found. They were wearing the least clothing of the group, and they were barefoot. The branches of the cedar tree above the fire had been broken at a height of up to 5 meters. Someone had climbed the tree, apparently to look at something or to get away from something on the ground. Moving back up the slope from the treeline, toward the tent, searchers found 3 more bodies. Igor Dyatlov was found about 300 meters from the cedar tree, face up in the snow, his arm raised slightly as though frozen in the act of protecting himself or reaching for something. Zinaida Kolmogorova was found further up, 630 meters from the cedar tree. Rustam Slobodin was found between them. All three appeared to have been trying to return to the tent when they died. Dyatlov was closest to the tree line. Kolmogorova was closest to the tent. They had been moving uphill, back toward shelter, when the cold took them. The remaining four members of the group, Dubinina, Zolotaryov, Thibault-Brignol, and Kolevatov, were not found until May, when the snow began to melt. They were discovered in a ravine approximately 75 meters from the cedar tree, under 4 meters of snow. And it was these four bodies that transformed a tragic but potentially explicable winter accident into something genuinely inexplicable. The autopsies conducted on the 9 hikers produced findings that have been debated, analyzed, and argued over for 65 years. The first 5 bodies, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, Slobodin, Krivonischenko, and Doroshenko, showed no significant internal injuries. Their cause of death was hypothermia. They had frozen to death in the open, without adequate clothing, in extreme cold. Tragic, but physically comprehensible. Slobodin had a small fracture to his skull, a crack, not a catastrophic break, which may have contributed to his death, or may have been a post-mortem injury from the pressure of snow. The 4 bodies found in the ravine in May were different. Nikolai Thibault-Brignol had massive skull fractures, the kind of injury associated with extreme blunt force trauma. Lyudmila Dubinina and Alexander Zolotaryov had bilateral rib fractures, multiple broken ribs on both sides of the chest. The Soviet forensic examiner, Boris Vozrozdeny, stated that the force required to produce these injuries was comparable to a car crash or an explosion, something exerting enormous compressive force on the chest from multiple directions simultaneously. But, and this is the critical detail, there was no external bruising or skin damage consistent with this level of force. In a car crash, the force that breaks your ribs also tears your skin and bruises your flesh. Here, the internal damage was catastrophic and the exterior was largely intact. Vozrozdeny, confronted with this finding, said he could not explain it. He had seen similar internal injuries in car accident victims, but never without corresponding external trauma. Dubinina, additionally, was missing her tongue, her eyes, her lips, and part of her facial tissue. This finding has generated more speculation than almost any other element of the case. The explanations range from decomposition. The body had been in the ravine for 3 months, partially submerged in meltwater, to animal scavenging, to something more deliberately disturbing. Modern forensic pathologists have weighed in on this point, and the predominant scientific view today is that soft tissue decomposition in water, combined with the natural action of small scavengers, can account for the removal of soft facial tissue without any other agency being required. The tongue, in particular, is one of the first soft tissues to decompose or be consumed in water. This explanation is entirely plausible. It is also not the explanation that most people remember when they think about Dyatlov Pass. Some clothing from the bodies, when tested, showed elevated levels of radioactivity. Specifically, Krivonischenko's clothing showed contamination. This finding was confirmed but never fully explained. The most mundane explanation is that Krivonischenko, who worked at a nuclear facility, had brought contaminated work clothes on the expedition. Whether this explanation is complete is still debated. The Soviet investigation concluded in May 1959. Its final verdict: the hikers had died as a result of an overwhelming natural force. No criminal charges were filed. The files were classified. The area around Dyatlov Pass was closed to hikers for 3 years. And then, for decades, the case largely disappeared, buried in Soviet archives, known mainly among outdoor enthusiasts and the families of the dead. Until it didn't. When the Soviet archives partially opened in the post-Glasnost era, And when the internet allowed amateur investigators from around the world to access and share information about the case, the Dyatlov Pass incident became a global obsession. The theories are numerous. Let us go through the most serious ones. The avalanche theory. This is currently the most scientifically credible explanation and the one that has received the most rigorous recent investigation. In 2021, a team of researchers published a study in the journal Communications Earth and Environment that used computer modeling and physical testing to examine whether an avalanche could account for the injuries found on the bodies in the ravine. Their conclusion: yes, under specific conditions, it could. The key insight of this study was that a slab avalanche, a specific type of avalanche in which a dense slab of snow breaks free and accelerates as a unit, can deliver exactly the kind of high force, distributed impact that would crush ribs and fracture skulls without leaving external bruising, because the force is applied through snow rather than through a hard object. Snow distributes impact pressure in a way that a rock or a car does not, producing internal damage without tearing the skin. The researchers modeled a scenario in which the group's tent, pitched on the open slope, was struck by a delayed slab avalanche, one that may have been triggered by the hikers themselves cutting into the snow to pitch the tent, and which broke loose hours after they had gone to sleep. This would explain the cuts from inside. The hikers, buried and panicking in the dark, needed to cut their way out. It would explain the lack of boots. There was no time. And it would explain why some of them walked rather than ran. They were injured, in shock, and trying to help each other. The avalanche theory is not universally accepted. Critics point out that the slope angle at the tent site is generally considered too shallow for a slab avalanche, that the search party found no avalanche debris around the tent, and that the footprints leading away were intact enough to be clearly visible weeks later, which would be unusual if an avalanche had passed through the area. The researchers counter these objections with additional modeling and the argument that a small, localized slab avalanche could leave less obvious evidence than a large-scale event. The debate continues. The infrasound theory. This theory proposes that the hikers were driven from their tent by a natural infrasound event, low-frequency sound waves, below the threshold of human hearing, produced by wind passing over the specific topography of the mountain. Infrasound is real and its effects on human physiology are documented. At certain frequencies and intensities, infrasound can produce anxiety, disorientation, visual disturbances, and a powerful feeling of dread or presence, a feeling that something is very wrong, that something is in the room, that you need to leave immediately. It has been proposed as an explanation for reported hauntings and paranormal experiences in certain buildings. The Kholat Syakhl slope, in some meteorological conditions, could theoretically produce infrasound through wind interaction with the terrain. The theory suggests that the hikers, asleep in their tent, were awakened by a rising infrasound event that produced overwhelming, irrational terror, causing them to cut their way out and flee into the night in a state of panic-induced confusion. The infrasound theory is compelling as an explanation for the behavior, the cutting of the tent, the flight without boots, the apparent calm in the footprints despite the extreme conditions, but it does not explain the catastrophic internal injuries. Infrasound does not break ribs. The military testing theory. The Soviet Union in 1959 was conducting extensive classified military testing in the Ural region. Rocket testing, weapons development, and various classified programs were active in the area. Some researchers have proposed that the Dyatlov group stumbled into, or was caught in the aftermath of, some kind of military test, a parachute mine, an experimental weapon, a secret launch. This theory is supported, in the minds of its proponents, by several details. The classified nature of the investigation, the 3-year closure of the area, the presence of Zolotaryov, the older, mysterious member of the group who some researchers believe may have had intelligence connections, and witness reports from other hikers in the area of strange glowing spheres in the sky on the night of the deaths. The glowing spheres are actually documented. Multiple independent witnesses, including a group of hikers in a different location, reported seeing unusual lights in the sky over the northern Urals on or around the night of February 1st to 2nd, 1959. The Soviet government acknowledged these reports but did not explain them. The military testing theory has a significant weakness. It requires a degree of cover-up and coordination that would be unusual even for the Soviet state, and it does not cleanly explain all the physical evidence. The katabatic wind theory. A katabatic wind is a sudden, extremely powerful downslope wind, cold air flowing down from higher elevations at high speed. In mountain environments, katabatic winds can reach devastating velocities with almost no warning and can exert enormous physical force. Some researchers have proposed that a sudden katabatic wind event struck the tent, either burying it in snow or creating such violent movement of the tent structure that the hikers cut their way out in panic, and that the same wind event was responsible for the injuries. The force of the wind itself, or of objects propelled by the wind, striking the hikers in the ravine. This theory, like the infrasound theory, has difficulty fully accounting for the specific pattern of internal injuries without external bruising. The human agency theory. Some researchers have proposed, with varying degrees of seriousness, that the Dyatlov group was killed by other people, either the indigenous Mansi people protecting sacred land or Soviet agents for reasons connected to classified activities. The Mansi theory has been largely dismissed. The Mansi had no history of this kind of violence, and the physical evidence does not support human assault as the cause of death. Soviet investigators questioned Mansi individuals at the time and found no evidence of involvement. The Soviet agent theory is more persistent, largely because of Zolotaryov's background. Documents uncovered in recent decades suggest that Zolotaryov may have had connections to Soviet intelligence services, though the nature and extent of any such connection is unclear. Some researchers believe he was on the expedition to observe or test something, and that what happened was connected to that mission. This theory requires the most conjecture and has the least physical evidence, but it has not been definitively ruled out. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the Dyatlov Pass investigation. The announcement generated enormous international attention. 60 years after the deaths, Russian prosecutors stated that they were re-examining the evidence with modern forensic techniques and fresh eyes. Their conclusion, announced in 2020, was that the cause of death was an avalanche, specifically a slab avalanche of the type described in the 2021 scientific study. Russian prosecutors stated that this explanation accounted for the physical evidence, the behavior of the hikers, and the circumstances of the deaths. The families of the Dyatlov group's victims were not satisfied. Yuri Kuntsevich, the head of the Dyatlov Foundation, an organization established to investigate the case and support the victims' families, rejected the avalanche conclusion. He pointed to the absence of avalanche debris at the scene, the shallow slope angle, and the pattern of the footprints as evidence that an avalanche did not occur. The 2019 reinvestigation did not have access to the original physical evidence. Much of it had been lost, destroyed, or deteriorated in the 60 years since the deaths. The reinvestigation was based primarily on a re-examination of the original case files and the application of modern analytical techniques to the historical record. In other words, the physical evidence that could definitively resolve the case no longer exists in its original form. The bodies are buried. The tent is gone. The footprints are gone. The clothing has deteriorated. What remains are the photographs, the diaries, the autopsy reports, and the memories of the people who were there, most of whom are now also gone. The case will likely never be formally closed to everyone's satisfaction. We have spent a great deal of time on theories in forensics and official investigations. Let us come back, for a moment, to the 9 people. Because the Dyatlov Pass incident has a way of turning its victims into abstractions, into data points in a forensic puzzle, into figures in a diagram of footprints on a slope. And they were not abstractions. They were people with specific, vivid, irreplaceable lives that were cut off at 21, 23, 24. The diaries they kept on that expedition are available, translated into English and published online by researchers and the Dyatlov Foundation. Reading them is a strange and moving experience. They are full of the ordinary texture of a group of young people on an adventure. Complaints about the cold, jokes about the food, observations about the landscape, affectionate teasing of each other. Ludmila Dubinina, the youngest, the one whose body showed the most disturbing injuries, wrote in her diary about the beauty of the Ural Mountains, about how much she loved being outside, about her plans for after the expedition. Igor Dyatlov, the leader, the careful, competent engineer, wrote practical notes about the route and the conditions. He was methodical to the end. The last entry in his diary, from February 1st, describes the camp on the slope of Kholat Syakhl and the decision to pitch the tent there for the night. Krivonischenko, whose contaminated clothing became such a subject of speculation, was photographed repeatedly during the trip in moments of laughter, mugging for the camera, clearly the comic energy of the group. Zolotaryov, the oldest, the most mysterious, the subject of more conspiracy theory than any other member, had just completed a long journey to join the group at a late stage. He wanted to complete a Category 3 expedition, the highest difficulty rating in Soviet hiking classification, to earn his full instructor's certification. He had come a long way, literally and figuratively, to be there. None of them knew that the night of February 1st would be their last. This is the part of the Dyatlov Pass incident that no theory can resolve and no investigation can address. Not the question of what killed them, but the question of what those final hours were like. Whether they understood what was happening, whether they were together at the end, whether they were afraid. The footprints going down the slope were calm. That is one of the only pieces of evidence we have about their state of mind in those last hours. They were walking together, in the dark, in the cold, without their boots, in whatever condition they were in, and they were walking calmly. Whether that calm was the calm of people who had a plan and were executing it, or the calm of people who were already in shock beyond fear, we cannot know. The Dyatlov Pass incident has become, in the 65 years since those 9 hikers died, one of the most persistently fascinating unsolved mysteries in the world. It endures for the same reason all the great mysteries endure. It combines genuine, documented strangeness with the irreducible opacity of death. We cannot ask the 9 what happened. We cannot go back to that slope on the night of February 1st. We can only work with what was left behind, and what was left behind is, simultaneously, too much and too little. Too much detail to dismiss, too little to explain. But I think it endures for another reason as well. The Dyatlov Pass incident is, at its core, a story about the limits of what we know. Not just about this specific event, but about the natural world, about the fragility of human beings within it, and about the gap between what we experience and what we can prove. Those 9 hikers were experienced. They were prepared. They had done this before. They had every reason to expect to come home. And something, a wave of snow, a gust of wind, a sound below hearing, something we have not yet identified, reached into their tent on a February night and undid everything. We have been trying to understand what that something was ever since. We have science now that we did not have in 1959. We have computers and forensic pathology and materials science and atmospheric modeling. And we are still, 65 years later, offering our best explanation rather than our definitive one. The mountain does not answer. The snow does not remember. The pass where 9 young people died in the winter of 1959 looks, from a distance, exactly like every other pass in the northern Urals, cold, white, indifferent to human questions. Dead Mountain. That is what the Montsi called it, long before February 1959. Not a prediction, just a name. Just a description of how a mountain feels in winter at altitude, when the wind comes down and the temperature drops and the dark comes early. Cold. Indifferent. Keeping its secrets perfectly. There is a memorial at Dyatlov Pass in the Ural Mountains of Russia. It is a simple marker, placed there by the Dyatlov Foundation and the families of those who died. It stands on the slope of Dead Mountain, exposed to the same wind and the same cold that the 9 hikers faced on the night they died. People make the pilgrimage to that place still, hikers and researchers, and the simply curious, drawn by a mystery that has never released its hold on the human imagination. They stand in the same landscape that Igor Dyatlov and his group stood in, look up at the same sky, and try to imagine what it was like. They cannot, quite. None of us can. The experience of that night, the terror, the cold, the catastrophic physical reality of what happened, is beyond imagination in the way that all truly extreme human experience is beyond imagination for those who did not live it. What we have instead is the photographs. 9 young people, laughing, squinting into the sun, holding each other up in the snow. Full of life, full of plans. And the diaries. Ordinary, warm, human, right up until they stop. And the mystery, which has not stopped, which continues to generate theories and investigations and arguments and documentaries and books, and this video, 65 years later, because we have not been able to let it go. Maybe we never will. Maybe that is, in its way, the most human response of all, to refuse to stop asking, even when the answer will not come. To keep returning to the mountain, metaphorically and literally, and insisting that what happened to those 9 people matters enough to keep trying to understand. Igor Dyatlov was 23 years old. Ludmila Dubinina was 21. They went into the mountains because they loved them. They did not come back. And the pass where they died carries Igor's name now, will carry it, as long as there are maps of that part of the Urals, as long as there are people who go into the mountains and come back with stories to tell. Dyatlov Pass. Dead Mountain. Still waiting, in the cold, for an answer that may never come. Thank you for watching. The Dyatlov Pass incident is a case I could spend 10 more hours on. The specific forensic debates, the Zolotaryov mystery, the full translation of the diaries. If you want a deeper dive into any part of it, tell me in the comments and I will make it happen. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And leave me your theory. What do you think happened on that slope on the night of February 1st, 1959? I want to know.